Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Form Check Friday. Now, this is the series where we take your viewer-submitted videos, we toss them up on the screen behind me, we try to help you all get better, more efficient technique. So last week we left off with Aaron, and Aaron's doing some bench press here. So the big thing that I'm noticing with Aaron, so he competed in his first meet in February. It was a push-pull meet, and this is 215 for what he called a controlled touch and go set of 4 at 8. So one of the things I'm noticing here is going to be the feet. Now, obviously, his feet are kind of toe-picked there, and obviously in the IPF, we're going to need to have flat feet, heels on the ground. Now, if you're not competing in the IPF, that's less of an issue, but I do think it's worth exploring that just for the sake of seeing if you can get a little bit better leg drive that way. I know a lot of people prefer to toe pick. Some people get a little bit more leg drive. I would say experiment with that, figure out which gives you the most or the best consistent leg drive. And that leads right into the next point, which is we still get this little bit of jolt for our leg drive as we're coming off the chest. You can see we're definitely applying a little bit more leg drive as we try to get that bar started. And one of the things I like to coach my lifters to do is try to keep that leg drive 100% the whole set. So don't let yourself relax when the bar is on your chest. Try to make sure that you are at maximum leg drive the entire set, and I think that's going to do a lot of good things for you. The touch point is very consistent. I would call these paused reps, but your touch is good, your bar path is good. I'm very happy with all of that. It's just the leg drive and the feet that I would probably try to focus on. Our next submission here comes from Moshe. Now, Moshe has been lifting heavy for a few years. He says he weighs about 70 kilos and hit a recent PR of 225 kilos for a single. Now, this set here is 200 kilos for a set of 3. And we'll notice that Moshe is definitely a round back sumo deadlifter. Now, a lot of the times I'll tell people, okay, you should try to get more extended. You could use a little bit more extension, maintain your position, things like that. And you definitely could if you wanted to greatly deload the bar and kind of start from ground zero. Now, here's some advice for somebody who is okay being a round back deadlifter. When it comes to sumo, it tends to be a little bit less efficient, but there are some ways that you can maximize your leverages when we're talking about the round back deadlift. So what I would recommend here, Moshe, is try to sit your hips down a little bit more and let those knees forward a tiny bit more so we can get a little bit more upright, take advantage of some of those leverages that we can build by leaving a little bit of flexion in the back. So if you're going to continue to pull round back, and it looks like you're pretty efficient at it already, I would just try to get your hips a little closer to the bar, maybe a little lower, and try to get that torso angle a little bit more upright so you can really maximize your leverages against the bar in that situation. Our next one comes from Newfoundland, if I'm not mistaken, and this is Byron. So Byron's 45 years old. He's been lifting for 3 years, focusing mostly on weight loss and coming back from a back injury. So this is 315 pounds, 85% of his 1 rep max. And he says he moved the bar position a little bit lower down his back recently, and he said that really helped his squat. So the unrack and walkout look pretty darn solid here. If we walk back just a little bit, you can see he stands it up, lets the bar settle before walking the bar out of the rack. That's a very pro move. Make sure that bar is nice and tight and locked into you before you start walking anywhere with it. Depth looks a little bit on the line. So what I would recommend is if you have any interest in competing in the future, he didn't mention one way or the other, is I would work on potentially a wider or a narrower stance that's going to allow you to get depth just a little bit easier. It also looks like right as we start, we do really change the orientation of the trunk. We go into a lot more extension. And sometimes that extra little bit of extension can make it a bit tough to reach full depth. So if we brace a little bit more ribs down, you might be able to achieve depth a little easier. Now, this is also a really bad angle to see depth from, because pretty much everything's going to look high from where we're at. We're kind of up and behind off to the left here. So it may be that you are achieving good depth. It's just the angle here. That's entirely possible. But I would say that a little bit of change in your bracing and potentially a little bit of stance difference might allow you to capitalize on a little bit more depth and a little bit more comfort in that bottom position. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, hey, how can I be featured on Form Check Friday? You can go ahead and click the annotation on the screen above me, right up at the top there, and we've made a video detailing how you can be, or how you can submit your lifts for Form Check Friday. Now, this next one here is Martin. He says he's a dragon boat athlete. He's training to get stronger, not necessarily for powerlifting. And one of the criteria for the national team as a dragon boat athlete is a bigger bench. So this is 235 pounds for a set of 5. He says he's a little bit worried about shakiness. He says anything above an RPE 7, you can see he says his arms shake quite a bit. So the big things I'm noticing here, Martin, is number one, you're obviously a pretty long guy, so you can see just how contorted he is right here with his legs. And I think if you just put your legs out this way more, or found a way to get your legs a little bit more involved in the lift, it's going to help you tighten up all of this. So it may reduce the shakiness ever so slightly, but it more or less will just help contribute to a more stable base when we're bench pressing. And that's a really important thing. So I think that that's the number one thing I would do, is work on finding a better foot position. Now, when we get into the lift itself, it's pretty loose, it's pretty bouncy. You do a pretty decent job actually of keeping the shoulder blades in a nice position, but we're definitely kind of dropping through the bottom of the range of motion, right? This whole bottom of the range of motion, we're kind of dropping it and bouncing it off the chest. And one of the things you can do, even if touch and go bench is essentially where you're measuring your strength, right? That's the skill component. We're not necessarily needing to incorporate a pause because you're not necessarily competing in powerlifting. But what you can do that may help you is some paused bench work, or work on controlling that middle point, build a little bit more strength, build a little bit more stability by doing some isometrics with the bar on the chest or pausing. And that's going to help you control that bottom position and be a little bit more consistent, which should lead to an increase in your touch and go reps as well. So regardless of whether you're going to be competing in powerlifting, I think it's probably a decent thing to try and practice pausing some reps. Now, as far as the shaking, I think that's going to be a thing that's probably just going to get better with time as you get more and more used to it, as you get more stable. Like I said, the leg drive and the lower body position is way more important than I think a lot of people take into account when it comes to the bench press. So let's work on those things, and I think that'll go a long ways for you. Now, our next submission comes from Henry. Henry's doing some deadlifts here, and Henry says he's been lifting for about a year. He weighs 172 pounds body weight. Doesn't compete. He's not necessarily against it, but he's just kind of training away in his garage gym. And this is a heavy double, he said. So 305 pounds for a set of 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually just leave this to play through a couple of times. And I want anybody who's still here watching this video to go ahead and head to the comments section below and leave your lifting critiques and your constructive criticisms for Henry on what he can do with his deadlift to improve it. And what I'm going to do is next week when we start our Form Check Friday episode, we're going to tune in starting with Henry, and I'll give my 2 cents on it once everybody in the community has had a little bit of a chance to help each other out. And I think this is a cool thing. It helps other people begin to start thinking critically about powerlifting technique, and I think it's good practice for people. So go ahead and leave your comments in the section below, and we'll see everybody in the next video. Take care.